I have a slight cough, so if you see me sipping my tea this morning, it's because I'm trying not to cough. And so, if you see me sipping tea, that's why. It's because I'm trying to not hack all over the phone. So anywho, so today's class is the WFM Lifecycle. So I really want to welcome you to this class, and I hope that you get maximum benefit out of taking this class. So if you're in this class, it's because you're in the WOW Beta program, where I am going to be teaching workforce management, all things workforce management, what workforce management is, why contact centers have a workforce management department, and how you too can get into the field of workforce management, okay? So I really believe that before we can really dive into some deep individual topics of workforce management, that you have to understand what workforce management is and the life cycle in and of itself. So this is definitely a class that you're going to want to take notes on. So if you have pen, if you have paper, kudos to you. If you don't, get some. Okay. All right, so the WFM life cycle. In today's class, what we're going to be talking about is the WFM life cycle overview. So what workforce management is and the components that make up workforce management. We'll also be talking about raw data and what that is, forecasting, what that is, scheduling, intraday, and then we'll have some room for questions at the end. If you have questions, though, if I'm going too fast or if I'm using terms that you aren't familiar with, feel free to type in the chat. I'll be watching the chat, and you can ask questions. You can unmute yourself and ask questions, okay? All right, so most of you already know me because you got on the WFM interest call. All right, but for those of you that are watching this by replay or you just have enrolled in this course, this particular, my background in workforce management is over 10 plus years. So I started in workforce management because I was actually a call center rep. I was reading a book called Blue Pumpkin at the time. So there was a big workforce manual guide sitting around the contact center. And I was like, I think this would be an interesting book to read. It doesn't take much to please me, guys. So I started reading the book, and the rest is really history, right? So I became a workforce analyst from there. And then I began to get into management, and now I'm in software for workforce management. And that's really the history there, okay? So that's a little bit about my resume and what qualifies me to teach you, as I've been doing this over 10 plus years successfully, navigating through companies that are unknown and very, Fortune 500 companies, such as Walgreens, Liberty Medical, United Healthcare, fairly large software companies like Aspect, Verint, so forth and so on, okay? So if you were on the WFM interest call, you kind of know high level what workforce management is. But again, for those of you that don't, WFM is an acronym that stands for workforce management, okay? In a brief sentence, workforce is the process of forecasting workload. And when I say workload, I mean call center volume, like the calls that come in, or emails or chats, So nowadays, we don't just call them call centers, we call them contact centers because they're multi-purpose, right? So back in the day, we used to just call them call centers because that's all that they could handle is incoming calls. But now, most advanced call centers are called contact centers because they can handle multiple types of contacts. So not just calls, they can handle chats, they can handle emails, they can handle social media inquiries. So if you go on, like, for example, Capital One's website and you have a question, you can chat someone. Well, typically that person is sitting in a contact center and they're on the chat queue, right? And so that is considered a contact, right? So we typically don't refer to call centers anymore as call centers. We refer to them as contact centers. And when you are referring to it as a call center, usually people know that it's a contact center. And vice versa. So when we talk about forecasting workload, we're talking about forecasting those contacts that are going to be coming into the contact center. And then also ensuring that there's adequate coverage to handle that work, right? So ensuring that if we get 50 calls, that we have enough people to handle those 50 calls or chats or emails, okay? So why WFM? So we really want to have a WFM department, or companies have a WFM department, because it ensures that they have A+ customer service, right? They don't want to have people waiting long periods of time for someone to answer and provide customer service, right? And so having a workforce management department ensures that if you have forecasted appropriately, then you have the accurate amount of people to handle that workload. So wait times theoretically should be low, all right, or tolerable. Then we also want to create a fair and equitable work environment. So part of workforce management is not just taking care of the customer, but it's also taking care of your agents who's going to be taking care of your customer, right? So making sure that your agents are treated fair and equitable in the work environment, such as they are getting time off from work, they are getting breaks, they're getting lunches, they are getting meetings scheduled, all of those types of things, right? So workforce management is not to be confused with HR, because we are not HR. We don't deal with the human relations or legality of companies. We deal more so with managing resources, right? And making sure that we have enough people in the right place. So it can get very close in terminology, but we do serve two entirely different functionalities in companies. Okay, so type that in the chat for me. Workforce is not HR, okay? Workforce is not HR. All right, so the other reason that companies have workforce management is because they want to increase business revenue. So you have some companies, again, that have sales departments, and you have different things like that. And the better I can forecast, right, the better I can make sure my agents are utilized appropriately, right? So I don't want agents just sitting on the clock waiting for phone calls, because the longer you wait for a phone call, the more time I'm paying you to be not productive. Okay, so the better I can forecast as a workforce manager, right, then the better I can ensure that my agents are utilized. That's called utilization. So again, this is definitely a class that you want to take notes in, because I'll use a lot of terminology that you'll be hearing for the first time. Okay, more than likely. Okay, I don't want to assume, but more than likely, I'll be using a lot of terminology that you're hearing for the first time. Okay, and so whenever I use an acronym or use a term that I think is a term that you haven't heard that is very workforce management specific, I'll take the time to explain that term. Okay, so utilization, like I said earlier, utilization is how utilized the agent is, right? So if I have 8 hours scheduled for the day, my shift is 8 to 5 or 8 to 4:30, how much of that time am I being utilized for work activities? Okay, and so that percentage will give me a utilization percentage. And so that is how it relates back to increased business revenue, right? I want to make sure my agents are as utilized as possible. So the WFM Lifecycle Overview. I highly believe, so I am in technology now. I'm not an end user of workforce management tools any longer. I am the person that goes out to install workforce management software, train on workforce management, that type of thing. But when I first started in workforce management, I was what they call an end user or, in operations. So I was the person who did the forecasting, I did the scheduling, I pulled raw data, I was an RTA analyst. I've done almost every one of the, well, I have done all of these pieces of workforce management. Okay. And I think it's really important that you understand each of these pieces of the life cycle so that you understand where you want to go in workforce management. There are a lot of different career pathing opportunities as it relates to workforce management. And the more you understand the life cycle and what each of those components do and how they contribute to the overall WFM life cycle, then you'll be better off. Okay, and you'll have a deeper understanding. So most people or most workforce management people, when you ask them what is the WFM life cycle, they are typically going to start with forecasting. Okay. However, workforce management really starts with raw data. Okay. Workforce management really starts with raw data. Someone type that in the chat. Workforce management starts with raw data. And so, yes, good. Workforce management starts with raw data, and then it progresses from raw data to forecasting. So I need raw data in order to forecast. I need a forecast in order to schedule, and I need a schedule in order to complete my intraday activities or RTA. Okay. And so if we were to look at workforce management as a workflow or as a living thing, right? Say, for example, like a child is in the mother's womb, then they're birthed, and then they turn 1, and then they turn 2, right? If we were to look at workforce management as a progressive thing or a life cycle, it would start with raw data, progress to forecasting, move to scheduling, and then to intraday. Aquanetta, RTA stands for real-time analyst or real-time analytics, depending on if you're thinking of it as a process versus a person. So if you're thinking of it as a process, it will be real-time analytics. If you're thinking about it as a person, like a job role, then it's real-time analyst. Does that make sense? All right, so this is the WFM life cycle. So what we're going to do for this class is we're going to talk about each of these components, and then I'll take questions from you guys. So this class is really to talk about what workforce management is, and then to talk about each of these components, and then we'll be done for the day. I'll give you, if you haven't already received it, I'll send you out the WFM dictionary of different terms that I've been putting together for you all, and then you'll be reviewing that, and then you'll more than likely get some homework before our next class so that you'll be prepared for your quiz. Yes, you'll have a quiz to test what you've learned, okay? So raw data. Raw data. What is raw data? Raw data refers to data that hasn't been processed, right? And so it's either manually been pulled or has come through some kind of automated computer software. Nevertheless, it is also commonly referred to as a data source. Okay, so before I can forecast, I need to make sure that I have good raw data, because there's no need for me to create a forecast if my data that's feeding my forecast is inaccurate. Okay, so most of us live in Florida, I believe, but if not, most of us know what a hurricane is, right? And so when the Weather Channel predicts the forecast of where this hurricane is going to go, they are looking at data models. You hear them say, oh, we got this spaghetti model, we have this model, we have this model. They're looking at raw data points to predict the path of the hurricane. And so if you think about that in the same terms of a contact center, right, with forecasting volume, they're looking at raw data, raw historical data to say, okay, last Christmas we got this kind of volume. So this Christmas we're going to get this kind of volume, okay, in the most simplest terms that I can explain. Okay, and so raw data is going to be your data sources that make up what your predictions are. Okay, and so while I was mentioning earlier, most people will start the WFM life cycle with forecasting. They'll just say, oh, I have a gut feeling that this Christmas we're going to get 300 calls. And it's like, how do you figure that? Did we look at any raw data? How do we know that we're going to get 300 calls? Did you pull any data sources? What are your data sources? Okay, what are your points of truth? So as a good workforce analyst or a good workforce professional, you want to make sure that you're looking at raw data in order to make those predictions. And a lot of times you will have a gut feeling, right? Workforce management is a art as well as a science. So is the pictures as well as the painting. It's a combination of all of that, right? But you want to be able to, again, say, hey, based on this data that I'm looking at, this is my projection, okay? And so raw data, again, is gonna refer to data that hasn't been massaged, it hasn't been altered in any kind of way. And it's also commonly known as a data source or source data. So type that in the chat. Raw data is also known as source data. Okay, so when you're interviewing and you're talking to people as you begin to move into your workforce management careers, if that's something that if that's one of the reasons why you're here, you want to make sure that you're able to talk intelligently about the terms that workforce management people will use. Okay, and so that's why I'm taking the time to go over terms that workforce management people will use. Okay, so raw data is commonly referred to as source data. Okay, raw data is also known as, or AKA, source data. So you'll want to put that in the chat. Okay, so where do we get this data from, Juanita? Where am I getting this data from? You're going to get this data, most times you're going to get this data from an ACD, also known as an automatic call distributor. Well, what the heck is that? Can anybody tell me, and you can take yourself off mute, can anybody tell me what they think an automatic call distributor does? What is an ACD? What do you think that does? Nobody? No guesses out there, huh? Oh, spit calls. Sam said ACD spits calls to everyone. Okay, that's good. It divides the calls between all reps. That's what Nikki says, Janika says, okay? All right, so you guys are both right, absolutely. So an automatic call distributor directs calls to the right department, absolutely. Sends calls to specific queues, absolutely. Yeah, you guys are awesome. So that's absolutely what an ACD does, right? So an ACD is exactly what it says, an automatic call distributor. It distributes calls. And so like Diamond says, to specific queues, right? So if you are in the sales department and you have a skill on your agent profile for sales, it's going to send you all the sales calls And if Sam has a skill on his agent profile of customer service, then he would get all the customer service calls, right? So it splits the calls and, like Aquanetta said, directs the calls to the right department, right? Have you ever called somewhere, you called your bank or you called a department and they were like, oh, you got the wrong department. Well, what was y'all doing? You know, you got the wrong department. I got to transfer you. It's like, I've been sitting on hold for 1,100 hours and y'all got to transfer me? There is a problem, right? So either the agent didn't have the appropriate skill on their profile to where they couldn't handle that call, or something is wrong with their ACD. Nevertheless, that is what the ACD does. Okay, it distributes calls based on skills, queues, departments. All of those are similar in nature. Okay, so great job. So an ACD, an ACD is also known as an automatic called or automated. You'll hear people refer to it as an automatic or automated call distributor. Nevertheless, you need to know what it is. Okay. So that's something you want to take a note on. All right. So when you're in a contact center environment and you're a workforce analyst, especially if you're going to be a business analyst or if you're going to be a forecaster, okay, because there are multiple types of roles or career paths that you can venture into in workforce management. So if you're going to be a business analyst, which is usually somebody who ciphers through data and they look at data all day long. If you're going to be a forecaster, which means this is the person who deals with math. So if you're not a math person or you hate dealing with numbers or you're not a very black and white person, then you probably don't want to be a forecaster, right? Then you're going to want to be able to know that. So when you're applying for these positions, you're going to want to be able to know, hey, I need to be looking at the ACD to look up raw data so that I can appropriately forecast, right? That will earn you bonus points or on an interview, right? So they would know that you know what you're talking about, okay? So I'm kind of giving you cheat codes during this course as well that you can actually be able to speak intelligently on your interview. Okay, so what are you looking for in your raw data? So really any and everything. When you are a business analyst or a forecaster, you're going to be looking for any and everything to make it tell a story. So data is just data until you make it tell a story. Somebody put that in the chat. That's a real preachy moment right there. Data is just data until you make it tell a story. Right? And so numbers are just going to be numbers on a sheet of paper or on the Excel sheet until you make it tell a story. Okay? So data is just data until you make it tell a story. All right? And so what do I mean by that? I'm going to give you an example here in a moment. But you're looking for any and everything. You're looking for the story behind the numbers. And so as a workforce analyst, a business analyst, a forecaster, you're looking at the numbers, but you need to be able to say, okay, I understand that this means this, okay? So this is definitely not a job for someone who is lazy. I'm just gonna put it like that, okay? Because a lot of times the numbers are just black and white and they don't say anything. You have to give it a story. So you're gonna be looking for aberrant data. What is aberrant data? Aberrant data is any data that is not the standard norm, okay? So if you typically every Monday get 1,500 calls, but then on this Monday, you get 30,000 calls, guess what? That's not the standard, that's a deviation, okay? Deviation. These are words and terms that you're going to want to use when you are in workforce management or you're talking to a workforce management professional to let them know that you know what you're doing or you've had some kind of training. Okay, so aberrant data is data that is not the standard norm. It is a deviation. So every Monday I get 1,500 calls, and today I'm looking at the data that came off of the ACD, and it says, oh, you got 30,000 calls. That's a red flag, right? That will be a red flag. And so something is telling me something happened on this Monday. Why did we get so many calls? What's going on? Okay, there could have been a new campaign that was released, a ticket, a sale that might have happened that the operations team didn't tell you about. In workforce management, that is a common thing, right? So the ops manager will release a sale, didn't tell the workforce management people, and now we're getting slammed with calls, and we don't know why, where all these calls are coming from, and we didn't appropriately forecast for it, which means we didn't have enough people staffed to handle the call volume. So do you see how this is all linked together? Okay. So aberrant data is data that is not the standard norm. It is a deviation. Short calls. You're also going to be looking for things like short calls, right? Short calls will point toward, I can't speak. Short calls will point towards agent behavior in many cases, right? And so if you are looking at your ACD data and you see that you have a lot of calls that are at like 3 seconds, well, I don't know what call center that they were calling into, but most call centers are not handling calls, customer service calls, in 3 seconds, right? So that kind of tells me as a business analyst or a forecaster, I have an agent behavior or maybe even a system issue to where calls are being dropped. Right? So you kind of get your Inspector Gadget, license when you become a workforce management analyst, because again, you make the data tell a story. So on paper, the data that's coming off the ACD just says 3 seconds, right? This call was 3 seconds until I start to piece together this data and say, well, I know calls don't typically get resolved in 3 seconds. So it looks like Sally Sue may be hanging up on customers, right? Or Sally Sue may be having system issues, right? I'm now making the data tell a story. Does that make sense? Okay. So contact count, sorry. You're also looking for contact count, right? Meaning how many calls have come in or how many emails are coming in. You want to see your volume, okay? You also want to look at things like your abandonment rate. Can anybody tell me what they think abandonment rate means? Type in the chat what you think abandonment rate means, or abandonment. When you have left the call and haven't helped the customer. That's good, 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 good. Anybody else? So abandonment, abandonment is actually the exact opposite, Aquanetta. Abandonment means that the agent or the customer has abandoned the call, the queue. So say, for example, they were holding for a certain amount of time and they just hung up. They got tired of waiting. That call was abandoned. Okay. So most contact centers will have a they will have a goal to have like 3% abandoned, 3% under abandoned. That means that you want to get to that call in under a certain ASA, which is one of the terms you see on the screen, right? Is average speed of answer. Okay, average speed of answer is how quickly you can answer that call. So it's on the ACD, it's in the queue, and it's waiting. 30-second ASAs means that call only waited in the queue 30 seconds before being answered. That's average speed to answer or of answer. Okay, so sometimes on calls hold 45 seconds, 80 seconds, 2 seconds, or 2 minutes, then the call will drop, right? Or the person will hang up and they've abandoned the call. Okay, and so your abandonment rate will continue to get higher and higher and higher. And so most contact centers, again, like I said earlier, they will strive to have an abandonment of under 3%. And depending on the contact center, like say, for example, you take calls for the emergency department, 911, right? They want to have an abandonment of 0, right? We don't want people getting murdered before people answer the phone, right? Right? We don't want bombs going off in buildings before they answer the phone. So in certain contact centers, right, they will overstaff in order to ensure they have enough coverage so that none of their calls are abandoned. All right, so that they have a low ASA. ASA is average speed of answer, which means they want an ASA of 3 seconds. As soon as that call rings, they want it picked up. Okay, and so depending on the contact center environment, like again, a 911 department, a law department, something like that, law enforcement, they want their calls answered really quickly. Emergency departments, FEMA, stuff like that, they might want their calls answered much quicker than if you were calling your bank to get a bank balance. They may say, well, you can hold because you have other options. You can go online to view your bank balance. You can do those different things. So depending on the environment or the type of call, they may have different types of service goals. Okay, and so what you're looking for when you're looking at raw data is you're looking at all of these different components. What was the abandonment rate? What was the average handle time? The AHT. And then what was the ASA? How long did it take to get someone to the call? Okay. Questions. I know we covered a lot. So abandonment is when a customer calls, they're on hold, they're waiting to get to someone. So if you answer the phone and you put them on hold and they hang up, that's not really considered abandonment. Okay, the call was answered. Okay, AHT is average handle time, and that is going to be how long it took you from the time you answered the call to the time you hung up the call or dispositioned. Okay, that is a contact center term. Disposition the call, meaning by the time you change your agent state on your phone system and left notes, how long did that take? Okay, and then also ASA, average speed of answer. Okay, so now I'm going to show you what some raw data will sometimes look like. Okay, type raw data in the chat if you're still with me. All right, so this is an example of what raw data will look like, okay, sometimes, all right? So this is some raw data that someone has put on an Excel sheet so you can be able to view it, right? So in technical terms, this really isn't raw data because it's been put on an Excel sheet, right? But this is easy for you to view it. So we'll go with raw data for the moment, right? And so you can see by looking at this raw data, you have week 1 stats, week 2 stats, week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, all the way up until week 12. Okay, we have the different metrics that are over here. So for example, phone service level, the service level, the target, the goal is 80%. In week 1, 80 between 85%. In week 1, they hit a 63%. All right, so what is service level? Service level is going to be what the contact center agreed to, how quickly they agreed to answer a call, okay, or what they agreed to is as far as servicing the call, okay. So that's what service level is, okay. So someone here in whatever type of call this is, I know it's a phone call because it says phone here, says that, hey, we're going to answer all of our calls, calls in 80% of our calls in 30 seconds is a standard ASA, okay, or a standard service level. Okay, so this is very raw data, and just by looking at it, you probably have no idea what it means, right? But an experienced eye, when I look at this data, I see a whole bunch of stuff, okay? So someone sent me this data and said, hey, can you tell me what's going on in our contact center, okay? And so when they sent me this data, I'll show you what I sent them back. And I thought I had it still pulled up, but I guess I didn't. So I'm going to pull it up really quick. All right. So when I'm looking at this data here, okay, when I'm looking at this data here, this is what I'm putting together. I'm seeing that they have a service level goal, okay? I see that they have a service level goal of 80 to 85%, right? Which they've only hit in looks like three out of the 12 weeks they hit their service level goal, okay? So that's one of the first things that I identified by looking at this raw data, okay? And it looks like that out of these 12 weeks, every time they actually hit, so this is their service goal right here, every time they came above, their agent utilization tanked, okay? And so again, this is something that a trained eye would see. I'm not expecting you to see this data, this from looking at this data. This is just something that I was able to put together based on the data that they sent me, okay? And so why am I going over that? The reason I'm going over that is because if you are a person who likes to look at data, you like to be able to pull meaningful stats out of information, then business analysts, forecasting, that would be something that you would want to go into, okay? But nevertheless, you still need to be able to look at data and say, okay, let me see what this is really saying and how can I convey this to management in order to get them to make some kind of change, okay? Any questions? So I'm not going to go over this chart in detail because it has more, I would take a longer time explaining to you what everything is on here than what the purpose of this class is for. So we'll get into in-depth forecasting on our forecasting week. Okay. Okay. So forecasting. So now that we've covered raw data is pulling together data that hasn't been manipulated in any kind of way. Now, once we have that raw data that we pulled from the ACD or what other sources that we have, because raw data doesn't have to only come from an ACD. Most commonly, it comes from an ACD, right? But if it's chats, if it's emails, right? Remember, ACD stands for Automated Call Distributor. So if it's a contact center that have multiple channels, right? And that will be called a multi-channel, right? Department or, agent, then it may not, the contacts may, or the data may not come from an ACD. It may come from a different source, okay? The point with raw data is that you want to know where the raw data is coming from. Okay, so forecasting. What is forecasting? Forecasting focuses on predicting contact center workload and staffing requirements based on historical data, okay? So as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at his raw data or raw historical data, that is going to be the prerequisite for building an accurate forecast, okay? So we can't be out here all willy-nilly talking about we're gonna get 30,000 calls and you don't have anything to back that up. As a matter of fact, your contact center has never gotten 30,000 calls. But just because it's Black Friday, you talking about we gonna get 30,000 calls. How? Okay, so we need to be able to look at raw data in order to produce a forecast that makes sense. Okay, and again, a forecast is just a prediction, so you don't have to be 100% spot on, although you do want to be within a 3 to 5% variance, right? Which we'll talk about that at another time. But you do want to make sure that your forecast makes sense. If you never received 30,000 calls in your contact center, why are we forecasting 30,000 calls? What data do you have to suggest that? And now, if you have data to suggest that, then by all means, let's go. Let's do 30,000. Excuse me. Okay. So what are you forecasting? So in most cases, you are going to be forecasting workload, okay, and staffing requirements. And so when we refer to workload, I'm referring to the calls that are going to come in. I'm referring to the emails, the chats, the social media inquiries, okay? So usually the bigger the contact center is, the more channels, okay, that they have. So these are all considered channels. So calls is a channel, email is a channel, chats is a channel, social media is a channel, outbound may be a channel. So if you have a sales department that makes outbound calls, that will be a channel, okay? And so usually smaller contact centers have less channels, because the more channels that you have, the more advanced your agents have to be, or the more agents you have to staff those different channels. Okay, so usually if you're on a call and you're interviewing for a forecasting position, you want to understand the types of volume, the types of channels that they get. You know, okay, do you get calls, emails, chats, social media, outbound? You know, what types of workload will I be forecasting for? Because you forecast differently based on the type of workload, okay? Calls and chats you would forecast on what we call an immediate type of forecast, whereas chats and or emails and things that have a delayed answer or delayed response, you would forecast slightly different. And again, we'll have a forecasting class where we go into deeper understanding of forecasting. Right now, this is just the overview class to give you high level information on each of these life cycle components. Okay, so the number one thing you're going to be forecasting is workload in the different channels thereof. And then secondly, is going to be staffing requirements. How many people are required to handle the forecasted workload? Okay, so type that in the chat. When I'm forecasting is workload and staff requirements. Forecasting is predicting the workload and the staffing requirements. Forecasting is predicting the workload and staff requirements. Good. So when we are forecasting, we are predicting workload and the staffing requirements needed to handle workload. So forecasting is commonly in the culture of workforce management, forecasting is commonly referred to as the science, right? So when people refer to workforce management, they commonly say it's an art and it's a science. You'll hear people say that all the time. Oh, workforce management is an art and it's a science. And so the science piece of it is the forecasting. Okay. So if you want to sound like you've been around for a while, I'm joking. You can refer to workforce management as an art and a science. And when they are saying that, when people are saying that, the reason they're saying forecasting is a science is because it is predictive based on real data, right? So it's a science. As opposed to scheduling, scheduling is more of an art, okay? It's more of a, okay, I have this forecast. Now, what do I want to do with the people? You know, you can get really creative with the types of schedules that you produce. Have you ever, how many people have worked in a contact center that's on this call today? If you worked in a contact center, say I, me. Okay. And so for those of you that have worked in a contact center before, you already know that schedules can get really creative, right? Especially if you worked in a contact center that is a 24-hour contact center. So 24-hour contact centers that have longer hours of operations, or HOOPs, HOOPS, which will stand for hours of operations. If you hear that term, that's what they're referring to. They're not referring to a basketball team or the NBA. Hoops is not the basketball team or a basketball team. Hoops is hours of operations. Okay, so in contact centers that have a longer hoop or hours of operation, a lot of times the shifts or the schedules can get really creative. You have 8x5s, which is your standard 8-hour shift, 5 days a week. Okay, you may have 10x4, so you may work 10 hours, 4 days a week to make up your 40 hours. You may have part-time shifts, all right? You may have split shifts. Split shifts means that you work maybe 8 to 12. You take a long lunch, so from 12 to 3, right? And then you come back and work from, or you take a lunch from 12 to 5, and then you come back to work from 5 to 8 or 5 to 9 to finish out your shift. Usually split shifts are common in 24-hour contact centers, and they're popular amongst people who have something to do during the middle of the day, like go to school, pick up their children, different things like that. Okay, so scheduling, again, is a lot of times referred to as the art, because as a workforce scheduler, so this is another department or another title in workforce management. Many times you can be, if you don't want to be a business analyst or a forecaster, then you have the option of being a scheduler. All right. This is for people who like creativity. They like coming up with all these different types of shifts and things that can also not only meet the business need, but also can meet the agent population need. So scheduling focuses on getting the right number of people in the right places to handle the incoming contacts or calls. Okay. So tell me in the chat, what are some interesting shifts that you can think of? And again, I don't expect you to come up with, solve world hunger in this session, right? You've never worked in workforce management, but what are some interesting shifts that you think that you could come up with in workforce management? I've already said a few of them, right? You can work a standard shift, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You can work 10 hours a day. For 4 days a week. You can work some split shifts. What are some shifts that you think you could work to come up with 40 hours for a week? Or not even 40 hours. And what about part-time shifts? What are some types of shifts that you can creatively think of? I'll give you a second. A creative shift. Who can come up with the most creative shift? And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Again, it's the art. This is the art piece of workforce management. Yeah, so we do have mixed shifts like that, Aquanetta. So 12-hour shifts, and then on other days, they work a different amount of hours, right? So that's commonly referred to, that's actually a shift pattern type, right? So a shift type where people will start to stair step their hours down. So maybe and 3 days off, 10 hours, 4 days, and 3 days off. Yep, you can do that, definitely. Again, there's no wrong answer here. So you will see people do that, Nikki, for sure. Split shifts, yep. Yeah, 24 hours on, 24 hours off, 3 on, 3 off. Yeah, so they're all different types of shifts that you can come up with, and there's really no wrong or right shift. The more shifts type or shift types that you have, the more flexible your scheduling can be, and the more apt you are to have the right people in the right places. Usually contact centers that have very static shifts, right? Static meaning you can only work 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. Usually they tend to have to overstaff because they don't have enough flexibility in their schedules to allow people to be part-time or to come in late on a Monday or leave early on a Friday. They don't have that kind of flexibility. And so what they end up being is overstaffed in a lot of areas and understaffed in other areas. Okay. And so what you're scheduling, as a scheduler, what do you schedule? You schedule people, right? So you schedule their shifts, You schedule their time off, their breaks, their lunches, right? You also schedule activities for the contact center. So remember, workforce management is a fine dance between what the agent needs and what the business needs. And so the business needs for people to be there, and the business needs for meetings to be scheduled, coaching sessions to be scheduled. It needs all these different activities to be scheduled, trainings to be scheduled. And so as a scheduler, that is your job to make sure that you're looking at the forecast, all right, what the forecaster has produced to say, okay, I know that I'm going to get 1,500 calls in this interval, all right? So an interval is a span of time, right? So usually when forecasters forecast, and again, we will go through this in a forecasting class, but usually when they forecast in intervals. So in either 15-minute intervals or 30-minute intervals, more than likely. Okay, and so your job as a scheduler is to say, okay, well, they said from 8 to 8:30, I'm going to get 300 calls. How many people do I need at 8 to 8:30 to handle those calls? And then from 8:30 to 9, they said, I'm going to get 150 calls. So is this a good time for me to put people on break? Because I don't need all 300 of them sitting on the phones at 8:30. So this might be a good time for me to schedule breaks or meetings or coaching sessions, because my volume is going to drop all the way down from 300 to 150. Okay. So a scheduler is making sure that they are looking at the forecaster's forecast to make sure that they have the right amount of people in the right place. So type that in the chat for me. A scheduler is going to look at the forecaster's forecast. A scheduler is going to look at the forecaster's forecast. Yes, a scheduler looks at the forecaster's forecast. So you can't just be out here scheduling people all willy-nilly. Oh, I'm giving 30 people off today. Well, did you look at the forecaster's forecast? How you know we wasn't gonna get slammed on calls today, right? So being in the workforce departments, you don't have friends, okay? You do, you can have friends, but what I'm saying is it's not personal, right? So a lot of times when people get into the workforce management department and they have friends that are out on the floor, they'll say, the friend will come and say, hey, can I have today off? And they'll say, oh yeah, you can have the day off. Well, did you look at the forecast? Because the forecast may say that I need this person here today, and you've just scheduled somebody time off. So now we're gonna tank, all right, which means we're not going to meet our service level because you just gave your friend the day off. Okay, so remember, your job as a scheduler is to look at the forecaster's forecast to know, do we have availability for this person to have time off? It doesn't matter if they're your friend, your sister, your mom, who they are. In that capacity, okay, you are balancing the needs of the business with the needs of the agent. Okay, so that is the scheduler's role. Okay, so again, put that in the chat. The scheduler's role is to balance the needs of the business with the needs of the agent. The scheduler's role is to balance the needs of the business with the needs of the agent. The scheduler's role is to balance the needs of the business with the needs of the agent. Absolutely. Okay, and then intraday. Okay, so this is, we're coming to a close of the life cycle. Okay, intraday focuses on monitoring and dealing with unexpected changes during the course of the day to ensure that service levels are met. Okay, So an intraday person or RTA analyst, right, real-time analyst, would be looking at the scheduler's schedule to see, hey, Ashley was supposed to be here at 8 o'clock, but I don't see Ashley here, okay? Or Ashley was supposed to be here at 8 o'clock. Ashley is just now getting here at 8:33. So the intraday person is the snitch. Okay, they're the person who monitors the schedule, okay, and say, okay, this is what's supposed to be happening. All right, this is the type of volume that is supposed to be coming in. Are we doing that? And if we're not, what do we need to do to adjust real time? Okay, that's why it's called real-time management or real-time analyst. Okay, so this is the person, okay, this role is good for people who are good to making decisions, good at making decisions. They're good at responding quickly, right? So if it take you 4 years to make a decision, this is not the role for you, okay? All right, if you're somebody who gets overwhelmed and stressed easily, this is not the role for you. Okay, and so as you can see, there are multiple different types of roles in workforce management, and they all have different characteristics. All right, so your business analyst or your forecaster, that's somebody who's going to deal with data. They're almost like your tech people. They don't really like to talk to people too much. Let's deal with the black and white. Let's deal with the facts. I'm going to produce your forecast. This is what I'm forecasting, right? It's the science. Your scheduler, that's the person who's real flowery child and creative, right? They are creative. And then you have your intraday people who they can respond, they can deal with challenges really quickly. They think well on their feet, right? And they monitor, right? They survey what's going on. Okay, so what are you monitoring? You're monitoring a mirage of different things. You're monitoring call center volume, whether that's emails that's coming in, social media, whether it's calls, emails, chats. You're also monitoring agent attendance. So in the example I gave you earlier about Ashley, right? Ashley was supposed to be here at 8 o'clock. Ashley is just now strolling in at 8:33. What's going on? Did Ashley call in to say she was going to be tardy? All right. So making sure that you report that to her supervisor, because you are not her supervisor. Okay. So workforce management are not the supervisors of people. They monitor and manage. Okay. So that's operations job to now address Ashley and write her up and all of those different things. Your job is simply to report it. Agent adherence. Can somebody tell me what they think adherence means? Type in the chat and tell me what you think adherence means. Agent adherence. Good. Following your guidelines, applying and following the guidelines, go by your assigned schedule, including breaks and lunches. Okay. Following rules. All right. These some good answers. Okay. Diamond is the closest, right? And so adherence means how closely you follow your assigned schedule. When we're talking about adherence, agent adherence for workforce management, we're talking about how closely they are adhered, all right, to their schedule. So type that in the chat. An agent adherence is how closely the agent adhered or followed their schedule. how closely the agent followed their schedule. So if the agent was scheduled to go on break at 8:35 and they went on break at 8:45, did the agent adhere to their schedule? No, they did not. It doesn't matter that they got stuck on a long call. It doesn't matter. All that stuff don't matter. Okay? Agent adherence simply means, did you adhere to your schedule? Which is why, because things like long calls can happen, that's not the agent's fault. Agent adherence usually is never, the goal is never 100%. Okay? Agent adherence is usually a metric in contact centers, right? And it's usually never 100%. As a matter of fact, it can't be 100%. Okay? Well, technically it could, but that's a conversation for intraday class, okay? All right, so agent adherence usually is somewhere around 80–85%. That's the goal that people want to, contact centers want agents to adhere to their schedule, okay? And then the other thing that you're going to be monitoring are things like system issues, okay? Did the ACD go down today? Are we having computer issues? Did the weather cut the lights out? And so now agents can't take calls. Those are the things that you're going to be wanting to be monitoring to make sure that you get the health of the contact center back up to speed as quickly as possible. Okay. So your intraday person is almost like a nurse. You know, if you were to think about it in a hospital situation, they're the person that triages. They're the one who makes sure that everything is going according to plan. All right, as scheduled. And then when it's not, then they deal with it. So if you're not a person who can deal with unexpected changes and think on your feet and deal, you have to always have direction, then likely intraday is not for you unless it's a very entry-level intraday role, okay? Because intraday is usually where most people start in workforce management because it is considered a fairly or entry-level role, okay? All right, and so that is intraday. So you have your 3 different or 4 different types of roles, right? When we're talking about workforce management, and hopefully at this point you have a better idea of what they do and why they do it, okay? So I'm going to recap quickly and then I'm going to open it up for questions and then we'll be done, okay? So forecasting, okay, or raw data. Let's go back to raw data. Raw data, okay, is data that is unprocessed, is usually referred to as a data source. You get the raw data off of ACDs or other manual sources, okay, and you're looking for any and everything, okay, short calls, call volume, abandonment rate, handle time, average speed of answer. You're looking for all of these different types of things, okay? And raw data is a prerequisite for forecasting. So the forecast is going to heavily rely on the raw data that you have. And so forecasting is going to be predicting the workload and the staffing requirements. So forecasting is predicting workload and staffing requirements for the contact center, okay? Scheduling is going to heavily rely on forecasting, and scheduling is, it focuses on getting the right number of people in the right place at the right time, okay? And it's also referred to as the art. So whereas forecasting is referred to as the science, scheduling is most commonly referred to as the art. Okay, so when you're scheduling things at like people and activities. And then with intraday, it focuses on monitoring and is heavily relies on the schedule. Okay, and it focuses on monitoring and dealing with unexpected changes throughout the course of the day. Right, so you're going to be monitoring things like the call volume, agent attendance. Are they adhering to their schedule? Are there any system issues? Things like that. Okay. So I am going to pause for a second. Are there any questions? This is a time for your questions. Next week, we will start the week with a short quiz, right? A team quiz, and see how much information you retained. I will send out this deck and this recording so that you can have it. I mean, not the recording, but I'll send out the deck so that you can be able to kind of review and hopefully you've taken notes today. Questions? All right, so let's do a quick recap. Forecasting is commonly referred to as what? Forecasting is commonly referred to as what? That's what forecasting is, Diamond, predicting the workload and staffing requirements, but it's referred to as what from the culture standpoint? So workforce is an art and a science. Which one is a science? Right, forecasting is a science and scheduling is the art. Yes. Okay. Um, raw data. Why is raw data so important? Right, it provides you with source data and how to move within the organization. Raw data is a prerequisite for what? Good, Noel. That was really good. Um, Noel said it's the source that makes up your predictions. Absolutely. Yes, in Diamond and Aquanetta, you are correct. Raw data is a prerequisite for forecasting. Okay. What are the types of, what are channels? Someone tell me, name one channel. Calls is a channel. What's another channel? Chats, okay. Emails, good. What's another channel? Social media, yep. There's one that wasn't, I said it, but it wasn't listed on the deck. Can anybody remember what that channel is? Outbound, yes, 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 yes. Awesome, awesome. So outbound, okay. Outbound is also a channel. Okay, so channels is just the way that contacts hit your call center, okay, or contact center. So outbound is also a channel, okay. Why is it important to understand the different channels that's coming into your contact center, especially as a forecaster? Why is that so important? Can anybody remember? So you know your workflow and how many people you need. Yeah, that's true. But more specifically, can anybody remember what I said? Why does it matter if it is a chat or if it's an email? Why would that matter? Why would I care about that? It's important for your ACD. That is true. It is important for your ACD, but it's important because you forecast differently based on the channel. The delays, right, right. You have different types of forecasting methods based on the type of channel that you're forecasting for. Right. And so we'll remember I said we were not going to get into detail about that in this class, but that's a forecasting class, right? So when we begin to talk about forecasting, you forecast differently based on the channel that you're dealing with, right? So say, for example, you're dealing with a call channel. Well, those calls are coming in usually one after the next, and so you can forecast that. Usually emails, you have a longer delay in your response time. Because usually you have to research and all of those different things, and you have a 24-hour or 48-hour service agreement, and so you're going to forecast differently. Okay, and so that's a forecasting class, but that's why it's important to understand the channel that you're going to be forecasting for. Okay, what is scheduling? What's the prerequisite? I'll say, what is the prerequisite for scheduling? Forecasting, absolutely. So you can't just be out here scheduling people time off or scheduling them for shifts because they need extra money and you don't have no forecast. We need a forecast. That's going to be a requirement. Okay. All right. And when we're scheduling, what types of things or what types of schedules do you think or shifts can we put together? 4x10s, yep. Flexible, static. So remember, flexible and static, those are two separate things. Flexible shifts are shifts that can move around. Static shifts are shifts that are static. They stay the same. But yes, you're right, flexible and static. Split shifts, absolutely. Excuse me. Part-time, absolutely. So remember, scheduling is the art, and so there's really no wrong or right answer when we're talking about what type of schedules or shifts you can put out there as a scheduler, but it does depend on company culture. So one of the things, what is one of the major things you want to take into consideration before you just start putting out shifts? I mentioned this earlier. One of the major things, right? We have to have a forecast, but after we've considered the forecast, what do we want to consider? Remember, I said it's not the MBA. Business needs. We do want to consider the business needs. Hoops, right? Hoops. We want to consider, and what is hoops? Hours of operations, absolutely. So if we're only open from 8 to 5, why are we scheduling a shift at 10 o'clock at night? We wouldn't, right? If we're only open from 8 to 5, is it possible for us to have a 10x4 shift? Is that possible? That's a question. If we have, that's a quiz question, so make sure you put a pin in it. Our hours of operation is only 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Is it possible for us to have a 10x4 shift? No, you cannot have a 10x4 shift if we're only open 8 to 5, right? The hours of operations won't allow it. We're not open long enough. 8 to 7, yeah, let's go for it. right? 8 to 8, let's do it, right? Because you want to make sure that you're considering their lunch and their break that's going to be in there as well, right? Which again, that's a scheduling class, so we'll talk about breaks and lunches and all of that good stuff. But one of the main things, so a prerequisite to scheduling is going to be the forecast. But when we've considered that, one of the things that we want to be considering when we're getting creative, so we can get creative within reason, right? So don't go to your manager talking about, I want to offer 10x4 shifts to my agents as a scheduler, and they're looking at you like, well, you only open 8 to 5. How are we going to do that? Right? That might be a problem. Okay, so it's really no wrong or right type of shift that you can offer, but you do want to take into consideration like hours of operation, company culture. If no one there is going to be willing to work a split shift, then you're wasting your time creating split shifts because people aren't going to work them. Right? So you do want to take in consideration the company culture where you're at and what they will and won't work. Okay. And then intraday. What is intraday? Somebody tell me what is the prerequisite for intraday? Scheduling is a prerequisite for intraday, absolutely. And tell me what intraday is. What is that? Monitoring and dealing. Yeah, they're the snitch, right? Yeah, they are the snitch. But more eloquently put, like Aquanetta said, the intraday people monitor and they deal with unexpected changes. Okay, but yes, they're the people who they tell. Okay, yeah. Ashley went here at 8:30. All right, she went here at 8. She got here at 8:33. I just want you to know. Okay. Hey, Ashley, she having a lot of short calls. Her calls is only lasting 3 seconds. You might want to check into that. You know, that's what the intraday people do. Okay, they look at the schedule, they look at call statistic, call data, they look at all that good stuff. Okay, so that's why workforce is commonly referred to as the big brother of the contact center, right? And in some contact centers and major contact centers like banking industries or contact centers like that, you'll see the workforce department sit almost at the perimeter of the contact center, and the agents are kind of in the almost like a fishbowl, right? If you've ever worked in a contact center or a major contact center. Okay. All right. Well, I think you guys got it. I'm excited. Do you feel like you have a better understanding of what workforce management is now? Who has a better understanding of what workforce management is? Good, 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 good. Is this something that you guys think that you would be interested in now that you know more about workforce management as far as a career? And you can definitely say no, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Yeah, so workforce is a very rewarding career. Like I said, I've been in workforce management my entire career, and it has afforded me the ability to do so many different things, both personally and on the business side. So now I travel the world on the technology side of workforce management, but it's because I have a firm background in workforce management on what I'm teaching you in these classes, okay? All right, so are there any questions before we end? So we've went through workforce management. I've done a recap. We've had a slight recap/quiz, and what our next class will be on is raw data. Okay, so each of our next 4 classes, the business analyst role is usually people who look at just data. Okay, so usually many times the business analyst is outside of the workforce department. You're being extra, adding personality traits to them. So the business analyst is usually a person that works outside of the workforce department, but they work hand in hand with the workforce department, if that makes sense, right? So usually the 3 roles that you have in workforce management is a forecaster, a scheduler, and an intraday. But sometimes you have a business analyst, right, that all they do is they look at data. They try to find correlations between data and how the call center is performing. Right, and so for the sake of this class and the sake of talking about raw data, I included them in the presentation today. But typically, if you're talking about just a standard workforce department, you have a forecaster, a scheduler, and an RTA analyst or real-time analyst. And every once in a while, you'll see a workforce department that includes a business analyst. But usually a business analyst is somebody who has a